Mila endures constant criticism from her mother-in-law and husband's indifference until she demands a divorce. They eagerly agree, revealing their disdain for her background. However, as Mila leaves with her grandfather, mysterious hints suggest an unexpected twist in her story is about to unfold.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Drama of Destiny. This story we're about to tell has a shocking twist beyond your imagination. First, let's get started.
When are you finally going to ask for a divorce? I've been waiting. Poor and parentless. You're just hopeless. My Mill sneered with a mocking smile and a sharp voice. From the beginning of my marriage, I had been tormented by my Mill. She would intrude into the house where my husband and I lived, wait for me to come back from work, and endlessly criticize my housekeeping as I did chores. How I folded laundry, and how I seasoned food. She criticized everything, but my Mill never helped. One day, after enduring this constant harassment, I finally snapped. You didn't learn to cook properly because you were raised by a man, not a mother. That's why your food tastes so bad. My Mill, who had sampled my cooking without permission, made that nasty comment. I had been raised by my grandfather since childhood, as I lost my parents early on. Knowing this, her mocking of my grandfather was unforgivable. In my anger, I demanded a divorce, and both my Mill and my husband agreed immediately. My Mill even suggested that it was for the best, and my husband chimed in, saying, "She's right. Our families were too different. Next time, I'll find someone from a better background like ours." But they didn't know. Their laughter would soon turn to regret. In the not-too-distant future, they would realize the truth and be devastated. My name is Mila, a 33-year-old housewife working part-time. 2 years ago, I married James, a senior colleague at my workplace. He had been my mentor since I joined the company, teaching me various things. "If you have any questions, feel free to ask me," he would say. His gentle smile pierced my heart completely. Not having much experience with relationships, I couldn't approach him aggressively. Just asking work-related questions made my face hot, and I couldn't bring myself to ask him out after work. Surprisingly, James asked me out first, saying he admired my dedication to work. I agreed without hesitation. "I was drawn to your hard work and dedication. Will you go out with me?" I eagerly said yes. After dating for a few years, we got married and started living together. Along with the joy of being with the one I love forever, I felt relieved that I could finally put my grandfather's mind at ease. I lost my parents at a young age, and my grandfather raised me. Why don't I have parents? I remember screaming at him during my rebellious phase, even though I knew it wasn't his fault. Although I have grown up and our relationship has improved, the memory of his sad face still haunts me. I felt guilty for the pain I caused. I wanted to repay him somehow. So, I decided to do my best to be a good granddaughter. I bought him gifts with my first paycheck, took him on trips for his birthday, and treated him to nice restaurants. Marrying James and starting a family was my way of finally giving him a peace of mind. "Mila, be happy." At our wedding, seeing my grandfather cry made me break down in tears too. Initially, both James and I were busy with work and other responsibilities, but recently, we have settled down and started thinking about having children. Of course, I wanted children, but pressure from my Mill was one of the main reasons I started thinking seriously about it. "Mila, it's been 2 years since you got married. Where are the kids? Don't you want to give me a grandchild?" I can't count how many times she aggressively asked that. Haha, yes, maybe soon. I'd laugh it off and change the subject, but the constant pressure was stressful. Even when I gave James a pleading look for support, he either didn't notice or ignored it, never saying a word to help. Despite trying to reduce my visits to the in-laws to escape the pressure to have children, it was futile. My Mill started letting herself into the houses where James and I lived. "What? Mill? Why are you here?" The first time I saw her there, I was so shocked that I raised my voice in surprise. However, Mill was completely calm and said, "James gave me a spare key. We're family, so there's no problem with me coming in, right?" At first, she only came on weekends, but now she shows up even on weekdays, waiting for us to come home from work. 3 or 4 days a week, I'd hear Mill greet me with "Welcome home" as I walked into the living room. I got used to it, or rather, I was so exhausted from repeatedly asking her to stop that I had no energy left to object. She never did any chores while waiting for us. Instead, she would tell me, "Hurry up and make dinner." I'm starving from waiting so long. Though I would obediently say yes inside, I was sighing deeply. I tried to argue back a few times, but that only led to long lectures from her. Even if I didn't say anything, my Mil would still give me advice on household chores, which was more like nagging. On nights when I worked late and had to reheat leftovers, she'd complain, "Leftovers again? Are you cutting corners? Freshly made food tastes better. Are you making James eat this kind of food too?" She never helped, only criticized, and I was utterly fed up with her. Even if I didn't say a word or just showed a hint of dissatisfaction, she would snap. "Do you have a problem with my advice? I'm giving you guidance as a person with more experience." As this went on, I developed a tolerance for her constant criticisms, but there was one thing I couldn't stand. Mil used our utilities without any regard while waiting for us. She would even leave the TV on while napping. Because of this, our utility bills kept skyrocketing. I was exhausted from dealing with my Mil and asked James several times, "Can't you talk to her? Ask her to return the spare key." But he never listened. "Come on, don't say that," he'd say, brushing me off with a smile. James saw my Mil's actions as an attempt to bond with me, not as an intrusion. "Don't be so uptight. She just wants to get along with you." James wasn't a mama's boy, just overly optimistic, so I couldn't push too hard. But my Mil's comments kept escalating. "Mila, you're so inefficient. Is it because you were raised by your grandfather?" She began to criticize my grandfather who raised me, which I couldn't tolerate. My Mil seemed to think that being raised by two parents is better than being raised by one. One day, I got a shocking call. "Today, your Mil came to the office without an appointment." It was Anna, my grandfather's secretary. Even over the phone, I could tell she was annoyed. What? For what reason? I imagined my Mil criticizing my grandfather, as she often did to me. My mind was filled with images of my Mil sneering and saying, "Mila, you're really inefficient. You were raised by your grandfather, right? What kind of upbringing did you have?" But contrary to my expectations, it seems she came because your grandfather once said, "Feel free to visit anytime you're nearby." She ate a lot of snacks and then left. Apparently, my Mil took my grandfather's polite invitation literally. Your grandfather's company gave me such delicious snacks. He's so kind to invite me over." When I got home, my Mil happily reported this to me as soon as I walked through the door. Yes, my grandfather probably did say that, but Mil didn't grasp the social nuances. Even if you were to visit, you should call ahead first, right? I could only manage a dry laugh in response. My Mil noticed my reaction, and her expression darkened. Then, as usual, she started making snide remarks towards me. "By the way, why can't you come home a bit earlier? If you were more competent, you'd finish your work faster and come home sooner, right?" My mouth twitched in annoyance. I was used to my Mil's criticisms, but that didn't mean they didn't hurt. I tried not to take them to heart, but I wasn't yet at the point where I could just smile and brush them off. "If you don't come home early, James will keep having to eat those awful leftovers. You have no sense of duty as a wife." "I'm sorry, I'm busy with work right now." I wished I could say, "Then why don't you cook, Mil?" When I tried to intervene while hiding my true feelings, her eyes flashed sharply. "Don't make excuses. Poor people are always busy. It's because you grew up with a single guardian and no money that you're in this mess." I was stunned by her words. I opened my mouth to say something back, but all that came out was, and well, words that had no meaning. "You must take after that grandfather who raised you. He was kind, but his company was old and small. No wonder he didn't achieve much. His clothes were always shabby. Couldn't he even afford decent ones?" Criticizing my grandfather was crossing the line. "Stop badmouthing my grandfather. What do you know about him, Mil?" I shouted, unable to hold back. My Mil's face turned visibly angry. "How dare you talk back to your Mil? Apologize now. I'm sorry for my disrespectful attitude." Standing firm, I glared back at her. I absolutely refused to apologize if she was going to make fun of my precious grandfather. She was the one lacking common decency. "What's with that look? You're really annoying." My Mil yelled at me. Despite being shorter than me, she seemed much larger due to her intimidating presence. "You're just upset because it's true, right? Isn't it embarrassing that your grandfather still has to work at his age because you're so poor?" Of course not. I was proud of my grandfather. Even though I explained this, my Mil just scoffed and refused to apologize. Oh, maybe it's not your grandfather who's embarrassing, but you? You're ashamed of being so poor that you make him work at his age. Mil's unfounded assumptions drained my will to argue. Sighing deeply, I muttered, "I've had enough," and retreated to my room. From that day on, my Mil's treatment of me worsened. Plus, she spent more time at our house. "Hey, you're doing it all wrong. Do it over." Any minor fault in my chores would trigger her shouting. Complaints ranged from dust in corners and poorly folded laundry to demands to rearrange the furniture because she didn't like it. If I tried to say anything, she would cut me off with a loud lecture. I realized that if I stayed silent, her lectures would last about 15 minutes, though that was not a pleasant discovery. Because of that, when she starts her rant, I learned to keep my mouth firmly shut, grit my teeth, and endure her yelling. My Mil always lectured when James wasn't around. Your mother came over again, and on top of that, lectured me. What should I do? I'd tell James, but he'd never side with me. As long as I endured it, it would pass. Though understanding this didn't make it easier, I cried in secret, often in the bathroom late at night. One day, my patience snapped. It was one of the countless dinners with James and my Mil. As usual, she invited herself over without asking. As I was setting the table with the food I prepared, my Mil reached out and started picking at the dishes even before I sat down for dinner. Raising an eyebrow, I quickly masked my irritation to avoid a lecture. My Mil chewed and swallowed a bite, then sneered, "This tastes awful. Remake it. You must have learned cooking from your grandfather, huh? That's why it's so bad." Her crude laughter and insults pushed me over the edge. The moment I heard those words, something snapped in my head. This was the breaking point, and I felt it hit hard. Yes, my grandfather raised me. So what? Gender doesn't matter. He raised me with love. Stop insulting my family. Still seething in anger, I panted as if I'd just run a marathon. James and my Mil looked shocked, but quickly resumed their mocking smiles. Seeing that, I was stunned that my feelings hadn't reached them at all. "Let's get a divorce. I can't stay with people like you who endlessly mock others." "Oh, got it, lol." When I asked for a divorce, he surprisingly agreed easily. In fact, they looked satisfied, as if they had been waiting for me to say it. "We've been waiting for you to bring it up." "LOL, seriously, having a poor orphan around is just awful." "I'm glad you said it first because I was afraid your bad luck would rub off on us." "LOL, exactly. The difference in our backgrounds is too big. Next time, I'll find someone with a family as good as ours." LOL. My Mil was the same as always, but James was a completely different person from before we got married. Where did the kind person who patiently taught me at work go? Or perhaps this was his true nature? Well, now that it's decided, hurry up and leave, you jinx, LOL. I packed my things while enduring their insults and called my grandfather to come and pick me up. I bit my lower lip hard and decided not to respond to anything they said. Nothing I could say would get through to these heartless people. When I received a call from my grandfather saying he had arrived, I put on my shoes and opened the front door without saying thank you or goodbye. My grandfather was standing there, looking at me with concern. Noticing him, my Mil smirked and said, "Oh, how sweet of your grandfather to come pick you up. LOL. Isn't he working early again tomorrow? Poor people never get a break. LOL. My grandfather's secretary, Anna, who had come with him, looked furious. She quickly pulled out divorce papers she prepared from her bag and handed it to James. "How considerate of you to have it ready, LOL. Exactly. This saves us some trouble." Laughing with my Mil, James quickly signed the divorce papers. My grandfather, Anna, and I had different expressions. I kept completely expressionless, as if all emotion had been wiped away. "We'll handle submitting the divorce papers." Yeah, I'll leave that to you. LOL. Now, hurry up and leave. LOL. Thank goodness that poor people blood won't mix with our family. It seemed they wouldn't be satisfied without making a final insult. Even when I glared at her, my Mil didn't care. "Well, I'll go with your grandfather and bring the car over." My grandfather and Anna left. For some reason, James and my Mil followed us to the entrance of the apartment building. "I just thought I should say a proper goodbye since you took care of us. LOL. My Mil said that, but her real intentions were to mock us one last time. I tried to keep silent, unable to bear them making fun of grandfather. I turned to say something, but Anna stopped me. She smiled broadly for some reason. "I'll get the car, so just wait a bit," she advised me and headed to the parking lot. James and my Mil, thinking she fled to avoid ridicule, continued to laugh mockingly. Then a luxury car arrived and my grandfather got out. Seeing this, they were stunned and approached it, drawn in. "Wow, this car is really expensive. No way that poor guy could afford this. He must have rented it to show off. LOL, they couldn't stop mocking us." I got in the car and exchanged a knowing smile with grandfather. Seeing this, Anna folded her arms and muttered meaningfully, "This is just the beginning." The next day, I visited my grandfather's company for some business and noticed commotion in the lobby. Though I was a bit far away, the lobby's acoustics made it easy to hear. "Get the boss out here now. I know you're in there." Hearing them shout, I put my hand to my forehead. Peeking from behind a column, I saw my Mil and James causing a scene. Security guards were restraining them, and they flailed their arms and legs, yelling, "Let go of us." Other employees watched from a distance, trying to avoid getting involved. Why were they here? Were they upset about the luxury car from the previous day and came to confirm if it really belonged to grandfather? Where did they find the time to do this? I sighed deeply and walked over, saying, "What are you doing?" My voice was devoid of warmth, as if all emotion had drained away. When they turned their gaze towards me, my Mil shouted, "Call the president over. He's here, isn't he?" "Your grandfather," James added. I let out a chuckle at their misunderstanding. Irritated, they both glared at me. "My grandfather isn't here. His office is in the building next door." "Next door? What do you mean?" In reality, the place we were in was rarely used. Grandfather's office was in a high-rise building next door, which was unusual for this area. "Both this place and the building next door are owned by my company." A deep voice boomed from the lobby. My grandfather had appeared. He was usually really gentle, but now his face set in an expression I rarely saw, angry and intimidating. My Mil and James, who had been so brazen until now, were left gaping like fish out of water. They had been so arrogant and condescending up until now. My grandfather strode over to them and glared down. His back still straight, grandfather's tall stature made him incredibly imposing. Intimidated, my Mil and James could only exhale air from their mouths. The raspy voices barely reached my ears. "I never thought I'd be looked down on just because of the appearance of the company I work for." "What kind of thinking leads to that?" my grandfather demanded. "No, it's not that we were looking down on you." My Mil stammered, trying to make excuses. But her flimsy attempts were laughable, and I almost burst out laughing. If their behavior wasn't looking down on someone, I'd like to know what is. The scenes of Mil and James hurling insults at me and grandfather are etched into our minds. From the moment you started showing up unannounced at my company, I found it strange. I don't need to be lectured on manners by someone who has none. As Mil was being confronted by grandfather, James tried to back away slowly. But the security guards weren't about to let him escape. They stood behind him, blocking his way and glaring at him. Grandfather sighed once and then continued talking. Grandfather explained that when I couldn't take the stress anymore, he had arranged to set up a new company nearby to give my Mil and James a taste of their own medicine. "That's impossible." My Mil finally found her voice, shouting. Her lips pale and trembling. She looked like she had just stepped out of a cold pool. "Your company was old and falling apart just a few months ago. There's no way you could set up a new office so quickly. Stop pretending to be something you're not just because we mocked you." Grandfather responded calmly. "The old, run-down building you refer to was the first office that Mila's real grandfather started from scratch. I kept it out of sentimentality. The part about it being run down was heavily emphasized. Grandfather himself didn't think that, but it probably reflected his frustration and sadness at being ridiculed by my Mil." "Real grandfather? What do you mean? I don't understand." My Mil collapsed to the floor, confused, clutching her head. Alternating her gaze between grandfather and me, she mumbled incoherently. Ignoring her, I suggested, "Maybe we should give them a tour of the building next door so they can believe it." Grandfather laughed and said, "Certainly," while gesturing towards the entrance of the building. "If you'd like, I can give you a tour." The angry expression he had earlier disappeared, replaced by the gentle smile he always showed me. Relieved by the absence of his intimidating aura, Mila and James relaxed, their fearful expressions shifting to smug grins. However, beads of cold sweat on their foreheads betrayed their lingering tension. "Oh yes, sure, we'd appreciate that," Mila said, unable to resist belittling us. "Sure, the outside might look nice, but I bet the inside is just as run down as this place." James, still not realizing how much it offended grandfather to call his beloved company run down, whispered mockingly to Mila with a laugh. Unaware that his voice wasn't as low as he thought, his words reached our ears. As we stepped into the new company building, Mila and James were struck speechless. The bustling employees and the sleek, sophisticated design of the interior were far from what they had imagined. Their jaws dropped wide open in shock, as if they couldn't believe how different it was from what they had imagined. "What is this? I can't believe you're running such a large company. You've got to be kidding. Are you mocking us?" They stood frozen for a moment, then snapped, clawing at their heads in frustration. "Who was it that started the mockery?" As they said this, they stopped dead in their tracks, collapsing to the floor. And then they were dragged away by the security guards and thrown out. We never heard from them again. Rumor has it that the story of them insulting my grandfather, a well-respected figure in the industry, spread like wildfire, leaving James ostracized at his workplace. The pressure was so intense that he was considering quitting his job. His plan to marry someone from a more prestigious family had all but vanished. Grandfather expanded the company further, eventually passing the CEO position to me and enjoying his retirement. Determined to live up to his great legacy, I vowed to work harder than ever.
Thank you for watching the video until the end. If you enjoyed the story, please give it a like. If you're interested in other stories, please subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much.